So we are now on chapter 2 of Proverbs, which is the most sort of cut and dry, straightforward. Here's some good advice. Do this, don't do that. Not sure what to do. Choose this, not that. Book of the Bible. And I'm so happy to be discussing this with you girlies too, because I really hope that it is enjoyable, whether or not you have a religious faith that you view as being a large part of your life, or whether or not you're a little bit suspicious of organized religion, which is exactly how I was before I became a Christian. And I became a Christian because of the fact that I was basically like rescued by a Quaker family in the Valley. Shout out Gerard and Elizabeth. They're so awesome in Nova Scotia, which is where my house is. If I didn't have the opportunity to basically meet what I could only describe as hippie Christians, I don't think I ever would have, or maybe in another opportunity down the line, but I don't think that there would have been a situation in which, based on everything else that I knew about Christianity, about organized religion, about how different sects of Christianity have been used as means of oppression in a lot of Western societies, including Canadian, I don't think that I would have been open to learning about it more. But I hope that it's very interesting to you, even if you're an atheist, just in terms of actually learning what is in the Bible versus what we're told is in the Bible. Because the last video, the first few verses of Proverbs, mostly what I discussed, it wasn't even necessarily advice. Most of what I discussed was about how there is a view and a consistent discussion and a consistent reference to women in the Bible, where even though a lot of Bible books are written from the perspective of men and often to a predominantly male audience, like Proverbs is very much, it's the context of a father discussing to his son and telling to his son. And again, because a lot of these books, they were written like hundreds to thousands of years after, no more than 2,000 years after Jesus Christ died, right? So a lot of the books were still written when, especially Western European society, was very much in that extremely patriarchal, crusades. Before the printing press, priests are saying like just really anything to be able to exploit their positions of power to the people that are followers of Jesus and at their church by being like, it's somewhere in the back, just trust me. But how even in books and such that were written within that cultural time space, it's still very, very much just as integral to the religion that women and femininity are not just viewed as like equal or equal-ish, but that femininity in and of itself is recognized for what it is, and that knowledge, understanding, wisdom in the book of Proverbs is personified as a woman. And I think that's extremely powerful, especially if you're watching in large part to just have some more context, which I think is extremely important these days. Now, we did that. And I think I mentioned at the end of the last video that I was going to go through verses 6 to 8, but actually I want to go through verses 6 to 19. That's going to take us most of the way through chapter 2 of Proverbs. But because of the fact that we discussed before a lot of the setting up in chapter 1 and stuff, which is, introductory, what is the book of Proverbs? What is the purpose? We talked about pretty basic concepts like good, bad, moralistically right, moralistically wrong choices. We talked about, the concept of the fear of the Lord and what that actually means in terms of it's not actually about fear, but it's about that reverence that God himself, he's not going to just tell you advice that justifies his own experiences because he's God. You don't have to worry about that. But at the same time, that fear of the Lord actually comes from the recognition that there are some instances and experiences in life where you really can only get wisdom from other people's experiences unless you learn it the hard way yourself, like deciding to, ride a motorcycle without wearing a helmet, where if you decide to fuck around and find out for yourself whether or not wearing a helmet or not is actually, it matters. If you choose not to wear a helmet, even though everybody else is telling you to wear a helmet, you're probably only going to be finding that out, recognizing that wearing a helmet is a good idea while you're taking your last gasping breaths on the highway because you've split your head into pieces because you rode a motorcycle without a helmet and you got into an accident. That's sort of like the fear of the Lord, is in trust that these choices, trust that the wisdom that you're being given is good, because in most instances, it's not going to be that fatalistic as wearing a motorcycle helmet versus not when you're riding a motorcycle. But there are going to be some instances in life where it is that important to trust, not because you're scared of the Lord, but because you have the recognition that sometimes making the wrong choice is going to have serious consequences. Not that most choices will. And again, we talked about that too, where I don't want to freak anybody out, because most choices in life are not like that, especially for girls that are watching this, that are, you're teenagers or you're still in university and you haven't had any context for what the workforce is like or what the real world is like outside of school. And you still have a recognition that you're in the tadpole pond and you don't quite know what's out there. I just want to make sure that I don't want to scare anybody. But we're going to keep going because I feel like the most important takeaway and discussion point and discussion basis for verses 6 to 19 is in chapter 2 of Proverbs is I'd like to talk about, how do you know if a person is a good person or a bad person? And I think that that's another point that in today's zeitgeist, where everything is overly psychoanalyzed, therapy speak has become very commonplace, and there's a bit of a social media echo chamber when it comes to things like advice and learning to have personal boundaries and such, where I do notice that there's a bit of an extreme lens where like anybody who you don't get along with is a narcissist, or everything else that's bad. We'll talk about that, but that's going to be what we discuss today based on these verses. Okay, so let's dive in. Starting at verse 6. For the Lord giveth wisdom, out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding. He layeth up sound wisdom for the righteous. He's a buckler to them that walk uprightly. I don't know what a buckler is. I'm just going to say that. He keepeth the paths of judgment and preserveth the way of his saints. Then shalt thou understand righteousness and judgment and equity, ye every good path. When wisdom entereth into thine heart, and knowledge is pleasant unto thy soul, discretion shall preserve thee, understanding shall keep thee, to deliver thee from the way of the evil man, from the man that speaketh froward things, who leave the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice to do evil, and delight in the frowardness of the wicked, whose ways are crooked, and they froward in their paths, to deliver thee from the strange woman, even from the stranger, which flattereth with her words, which forsaketh the guide of her youth, and forgetteth the covenant of her God. For her house inclineth unto death, and her paths unto the dead. None that go unto her return again, neither take they hold of the paths of life. Okay, so those are verses 6 to 19 in Proverbs 2. Now, couple things, again, just a quick recognition of the fact that when we went through those verses, there was a discussion about bad people. And when they talked about bad people, they talked about bad men and they talked about bad women. And they talked about bad men and bad women in slightly different ways in terms of their descriptions, where the bad man is described as, a lot of the bad masculine qualities, and the bad woman is described as a lot of the bad feminine qualities. But just remember and recognize that discussing evil people we discussed men and women equally because in the Bible, in Christianity, men and women, well, it is recognized that, feminine energy, femininity, masculinity, those are quite different. And again, as a queer person that is presented as masculine, as feminine, many times in my life, I don't believe that ascribes to, binary genders. There's no statement or recognition of that means that there's only men and women. I don't, it's one of those things that I just don't understand why people care about it so much negatively in terms of just this fixation that a lot of people in positions of power, especially we see this in the States, a lot of right-wing ideologies, for some reason, the torch that they're holding up is this mythical Frankenstein monster of a non-binary or transgender person. It has nothing to do with anything. And it's really not something that is new in any way, but I digress, excuse me. So just remember, again, it's not like we were talking about the evil man. Men are so evil, blah, 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 blah. That's it. It was like, yeah, guys can be evil and so can women. Not